The Cold War wasn't cold for the countries caught in between. Instead of fighting each other directly, the United States and the Soviet Union fought the Cold War through proxy wars. These were conflicts where both superpowers backed opposing sides in smaller countries, supplying weapons, money, and training while avoiding open war between themselves. With nuclear weapons making direct conflict potentially world-ending, proxy wars became a way to compete without triggering global annihilation. This turned local conflicts into global battlegrounds. In Korea and Vietnam, millions died as each side tried to stop the other from expanding its influence. In Afghanistan, the Soviet Union fought a long and costly war against insurgent forces backed by the United States and its allies, draining Soviet resources and leaving the country devastated. Across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, civil wars were prolonged and intensified by superpower intervention, transforming regional struggles into Cold War battlefields. The long-term consequences were severe. Entire nations were destabilized, economies were shattered, and political systems were distorted by foreign interference. While the superpowers avoided fighting each other directly, millions of people in developing countries paid the price. Many modern conflicts and regional instabilities can still be traced back to Cold War proxy wars, making this one of the most destructive legacies of the conflict. The Cold War didn't just militarize borders, it militarized trust. Governments on both sides of the Iron Curtain built vast surveillance systems, treating their own citizens as potential threats. Fear of spies, subversion, and ideological enemies led to phone tapping, mail interception, and the widespread use of informants, creating societies where privacy became a luxury. In the East, this surveillance reached extreme levels. In East Germany, the secret police, known as the Stasi, built one of the most intrusive monitoring systems in history. Neighbors informed on neighbors, families were torn apart by suspicion, and millions of personal files were kept on ordinary citizens. The goal was not only to punish dissent, but to prevent it from forming at all through psychological pressure and constant fear of being watched. Surveillance was not limited to authoritarian states. In the West, agencies like the FBI and intelligence services monitored suspected communists, activists, and civil rights leaders, often crossing legal boundaries in the name of national security. The Cold War normalized the idea that mass monitoring was necessary to protect the state, embedding surveillance deep into modern government structures. Even today, many of the systems and mindsets behind digital surveillance trace their origins back to this era, blurring the line between security and personal freedom. The space race turned the Cold War into a battle for the sky. What began as competition in rocket science quickly became a public contest of power, with each superpower trying to prove that its system was more advanced, more capable, and more destined to lead the future. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957 and sent the first human into space just years later, it sent shockwaves through the United States and the wider world. Space was never just about exploration. The same rocket technology that carried satellites and astronauts into orbit could also deliver nuclear warheads across continents. Every launch was a demonstration of military capability, and every breakthrough fed fear that one side was gaining a decisive advantage. The race to the moon became a symbolic battlefield, culminating in the American landing in 1969, which was framed as a victory not just of science, but of ideology. The long-term consequences of the space race reshaped the modern world. It accelerated the development of satellites, computing, and global communication systems that now underpin everyday life. What began as a rivalry driven by fear and propaganda ultimately transformed how humanity sees the planet and its place in the universe. leaving a legacy that still shapes technology, warfare, and global power today. By the peak of the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union had built enough nuclear weapons to wipe out humanity multiple times over, and neither side was willing to stop first. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union entered a dangerous competition to build the most powerful weapons the world had ever seen. What began as a race to match each other's atomic bombs quickly escalated into the creation of hydrogen bombs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and vast nuclear stockpiles capable of destroying entire continents. By the 1960s, both sides possessed enough firepower to wipe out human civilization several times over. This buildup was driven by fear and distrust. Each new weapon developed by one side forced the other to respond with something even more destructive. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, known as MAD, emerged from this logic. The idea was simple and terrifying. If either side launched a nuclear attack, the other would retaliate, guaranteeing the total destruction of both nations. Nuclear war became unwinnable, yet the threat of it hung permanently over the world. The arms race brought humanity closer to annihilation than ever before. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba pushed the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war. Later, near misses like the 1983 false alarm incident, when a Soviet officer chose not to report a supposed missile launch, showed how easily catastrophe could have been triggered by human error. In the long term, the arms race reshaped global security and drained enormous resources, particularly from the Soviet economy, contributing to its eventual collapse. Even today, the nuclear weapons built during the Cold War continue to shape international politics. The world remains trapped in a system of deterrence created decades ago, where peace depends not on trust, but on the fear of mutual destruction. The United States and the Soviet Union fought a war that wasn't just about weapons. It was about controlling what people believed. Propaganda became a weapon in itself, an endless flood of posters, films, news stories, and school lessons designed to make one system look like the future, and the other look like pure evil. In the West, propaganda focused on freedom, democracy, and consumer life, presenting America as prosperous and modern, while warning that communism meant poverty, dictatorship, and fear. In the Soviet world, the message was flipped. The USSR portrayed itself as equal and stable, while depicting the United States as racist, imperialist, and obsessed with war. Both sides reduced the world into a simple story: good versus evil, and everyone had to choose a side. This wasn't just advertising, it was psychological warfare. Radio stations like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe beamed news and music behind the Iron Curtain, while Soviet media was tightly controlled, filtering reality through state censorship. In schools, children were taught to fear the enemy. In America, duck and cover drills made nuclear war feel inevitable. In the East, propaganda reinforced loyalty and painted dissent as betrayal. The long-term consequence was a world trained to live inside narratives. The Cold War normalized fear-based messaging, enemy stereotypes, and information control, foundations that still shape modern politics today. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed, the methods didn't disappear. They evolved into modern information warfare, where controlling the story can be as powerful as controlling the battlefield. In December 1991, the Soviet Union, one of the two most powerful nations on Earth, officially ceased to exist. A superpower that had dominated half of Europe, rivaled the United States for decades, and shaped global politics simply fell apart. But this wasn't a sudden event. It was the result of years of pressure, failure, and internal decay. For decades, the Soviet economy had been stagnating. The command economy struggled with inefficiency, corruption, and chronic shortages. While the state poured enormous resources into the military and the arms race, everyday citizens faced empty shelves, poor living standards, and little hope of improvement. By the 1980s, the system was cracking. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, he tried to save it. His reforms, perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, political openness, were meant to modernize the Soviet Union. But instead of fixing the system, they exposed how broken it already was. For the first time, people were allowed to openly criticize the government. Corruption, disasters like Chernobyl, and decades of lies came into the open. Trust in the Communist Party collapsed almost overnight. At the same time, nationalism surged across the Soviet republics. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and others began demanding independence. Once tightly controlled by Moscow, these regions no longer feared Soviet force, because the Soviet Union no longer had the strength to impose it. Then came the final blow. In August 1991, hardline communists attempted a coup to remove Gorbachev and stop the collapse. The coup failed, but in doing so, it completely destroyed the authority of the Communist Party. Russia's leader, Boris Yeltsin, emerged as the dominant figure. Within months, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed an agreement declaring the Soviet Union dissolved. On December 26, 1991, the USSR officially ceased to exist. The consequences were massive. 15 new independent countries were created overnight. Eastern Europe fully broke away from Soviet control. The Cold War ended, not with victory on the battlefield, but with the collapse of one side from within. For millions, the aftermath was brutal. The 1990s in post-Soviet states were marked by economic collapse, crime, corruption, and social chaos. Entire industries vanished. Savings were wiped out. Life expectancy dropped. While the Cold War was over, the scars it left behind shaped global politics for decades to come. The fall of the Soviet Union didn't just end an empire. It reshaped the balance of power for the entire world. Thanks for watching. This completes the trilogy World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. If you missed the first two, they're on screen now. Let me know what topic you want me to break down next.